was inspired to do this series by my own adventures restoring the old farm. But what I really wanted to do after 20 years of writing all kinds of novels was to direct a series at women who are over 40. Actually, you know, I think these girls are more like over 50, but it seemed to me that very little that is written for real women, and that's what I wanted to write, grown-up books for grown-up women. What the three friends discovered in their first book, which is A Year on Ladybug Farm, is after their husbands were gone and their children were all grown up and they had nothing but time, they still had an entire lifetime ahead of them. And they decided to reinvent themselves. They wanted to, they were looking for an adventure. And the kind of adventure that they found was in the middle of the Shenandoah Valley with this old tumbled down mansion. And each one of them in her own way fell in love with this big old house. They decided to join forces, move in together, which was like a challenge in itself. And they gave themselves a year to restore the old house. They decided if it didn't work, they had this, you know, mansion they could resell, they had lost nothing. And they kind of looked at it as a year of an adventure. During the year, they actually began to form a family and their lives were changed forever. Not only did they form a family unit among themselves, but they started taking in stray animals, stray children. So they end up at the end of the first book with an entirely different life than they had planned, wanted, or intended. But what I wanted to show with that setup was how women can create for themselves. They can create something grand out of virtually nothing. During their first Ladybug book, which I should say they're running low on at the bookstore, but can be ordered easily. And I think you have a few copies out front too. What they discovered in the first book was that despite the challenges, I mean, something went wrong every minute, just like it did with me. When I first moved to Raven County, which is in the northeast Georgia mountains, just as far as you can get without being in North Carolina. And it was 20 years ago. And nobody lived there. Nobody lived there who wanted to work, in other words. So if you wanted sheetrock hung, you could forget that. If you want a screen door installed, learn to do it yourself. My favorite story is when my microwave broke and I called up the appliance repair person, and this almost went in the Ladybug Farm book, but I took it out only because the book was too long, because I think this is a great story. And they said, oh, we'll be out sometime next week. Well, I couldn't wait that long to use my microwave. I said, I tried to negotiate. Can you come tomorrow? No. I tell you what, she says to me over the phone, get your screwdriver. And she had me taking my microwave apart. Okay, call me back when you get to this point. Well, here, after about 3 hours, I got my entire microwave oven like over the counter. And she says, do you see those little fuse? And I had completely torn out the guts of this thing and still couldn't find the little fuse. She says, well, if you could have found it, that would have fixed the problem. And I mean, that was pretty much the way that it was, and the kind of situations that the ladies in Ladybug Farm encountered too. You learn to do it yourself or it didn't get done. Now, in the Ladybug Farm series, there are 3 women. One has a dream to be an artist, one has a dream to be a chef, and the other one just wants to restore, she wants to build, she wants to restore old houses. And I've often been asked, are they ever going to get their dreams? Because each time they get close, something happens. And that's kind of life, but it is really life when you're trying to restore an old house, which is a money pit. I mean, that's just what you have to understand. So the answer to that is every time their dreams keep changing. And that's what's going to continue to happen throughout the books. When they first decided that they wanted to go on this enterprise, they were very specific about what they wanted to do. And by the time they get to the second book, everything has changed. And they're making great accomplishments, but they have nothing to do love letters from Ladybug Farm. They get very, very close to getting their dreams. And then, because this is just out, I'm going to guess nobody has finished reading it yet, so I won't tell you how it ends. That as they start out, you know, Lindsay has her art studio, and Bridget is getting a chance to cater a big event, and Cece has everything under control of the house. And then doggone it, wouldn't you know, something goes wrong. So that's pretty much how they continue to cope with the things that are thrown at them, or that they discover, or that they just stumble over during the course of trying to live their lives. One thing that I wanted to be really careful about in writing this series is to not buy into the cliche of women not being able to get along and live together. So you'll never see my girls fighting. That may not be realistic, but it's not going to happen, because that's not something that was my purpose in putting these three women together, is to show the kinds of unity and building they can do when they all have a single goal without catfighting amongst each other. Okay, now, so I'm going to come back to this series in a minute, but I wanted to talk to you a little bit about some of the things that I've done before and how I got to this point. I started out in 1982 just writing for a living, and I have been able to do that for all of these 28 years. And I've done that by changing my name a lot and writing all kinds of different genres. I believe that's what a writer does. If you write, you need to be able to write. I have an agent right now who's trying to get me to write things I have no idea how to do, but I can learn. I can adapt. When you choose this lifestyle to be a working writer, and that's very often different from a literary writer or a writer who just wants to write a book because she has something to say. I am a writer in the way other people are teachers or businessmen or whatever. This is my job. And so I have learned deliberately to write all kinds of different things. I have written romance forever. I've written mysteries. I've written science fiction. I've written fantasy. I have written this kind of general women's fiction. Whatever I think people want to read, that's what I'm going to write. And you learn to do that. It's not something that, in my case anyway, I think it's something that I was particularly born with this ability to adapt. I had to learn to adapt to what the marketplace is. And I'm often asked, why do I keep changing my name? And that's the reason. Because I read a whole series of wildly popular Western adventure books, but the people who read my romances were not going to cross over and read Western adventure under the same name, so I chose a male name to write those books under. Now that pretty much I've kept the mystery name and the women's fiction name the same. Donna Ball is like my real name. That's the one I didn't make up, if anyone's interested. And the reason is because I can find some crossover. Now, my publisher didn't believe that would happen. They thought after the dog books that nobody would cross over and read the ladybug books. I mean, they're both about animals, but that was pretty much the only thing they had in common. But they did. They did. The people who loved the dog mysteries also found something amusing or entertaining for themselves in the love letters books, and the Ladybug Farm books. And I think the reason for that is because they're both about relationships. With the dog mysteries, they did have the mystery plot, but the overarching theme in those books was about the relationship between the heroine and her golden retriever search and rescue dog, and between the heroine and her town, her community, and her personal relationships. These books are all about relationships. They're all about the relationship between the women, the relationship with each other, and almost as important, the relationship with the house that really becomes a character in the book. And even to a greater extent with each book, the relationship with their community. And again, those are things I like to write about. I think they're important. I think they're particularly important to women. And I will say that with the exception of the Western Adventure series, all of my books have been directed pretty much toward women. I think that's what I know. That's what I'm interested in. That's what I like to write about. And I think it's important to know your audience. Now, I know the most boring thing in the whole world is to hear an author read from her work, but I'm going to read just this little portion from Love Letters, if I can actually see it, because there is a story behind this. We have one of the continuing themes in all three of the books is the big house has this huge wraparound front porch, and if you ever travel through, well, anywhere in the South, but especially up and down through the Shenandoah Valley, you'll see the big old brick houses with the columns and the porches. Okay, picture that. And the first thing that the ladies did when they moved in was buy 3 rocking chairs. So the continuing theme is every night at sunset they'll come out and they'll sit on the porch and they'll talk about women things. And some of that was kind of my guidance and inspiration for writing these books, is to hear the ladies interpret the experiences of their day into philosophies. It basically, I had the philosophies that they talked about before I ever had the plot through the book. So the books were written around these front porch scenes. The first 2 books are a little bit, they are funny and they are adventurous, but they have meaning. You know, they're a little bit more serious. This 3rd book is a good deal lighter. So this is what they're talking about as the book opens, and they come out one sunset to sit and talk about their day. You know, Bridget observed after a time, all things considered, it really was a lot of fun. Cece tried to lift her head to look at her, winced in pain, and settled back down again. You did not just say that to me. Well, I mean, except for the storm. Tornado, corrected Lindsay. That hasn't been confirmed yet, Bridget objected. And the dog, Cece said without opening her eyes. And the groom's mother, and the groom, and the explosion, and the goat. Like I said, Bridget said uncomfortably, all things considered. No one spoke for a measure of time. No one had the energy. You know what the problem was, don't you, Bridget said after a moment. Personally, replied Lindsay, a rather tired smile twitching at her lips, I blame Michelle Obama. Bridget smothered a giggle, and even Cece, without opening her eyes, managed a lopsided smile. Okay, Cece said, tell me what the problem was. And Bridget said, sex. Cece opened her eyes and lifted her head to look at her 2 best friends. The 3 women thought about that for a while. Then Cece gave a slow, reflective nod of her head. Do you know, Bridget, she said, this time I think you've got it exactly right. Lindsay agreed regretfully, sad but true. But it was a beautiful ceremony, Bridget said. Cece glanced at one of the half-empty champagne glasses on the small table beside her chair. She had no idea to whom it belonged. She picked it up dubiously, sniffed the contents, gave the rim a cursory examination for lip marks, and drank it down. Yeah, she said, and smiled just a little. It was.